I knew something was wrong before I even pulled fully into the driveway. You ever get that weird feeling in your stomach, like your brain notices the danger before your eyes do? Yeah, it was one of those moments. I had just gotten back from a 3-day fishing trip up near Lake Murray, exhausted, sunburned, still smelling like gasoline and river water, and the second my truck headlights hit the side of the house, I noticed these empty brackets hanging off the walls like broken bones. At first I thought maybe a storm ripped something loose, then I got closer and realized every single security camera was gone. Not stolen, worse, destroyed. Somebody had taken all 6 cameras down, smashed the housings open, cut the wires clean, then dumped the whole pile next to my garage like they were making some kind of statement. These weren't cheap Amazon toys either. I'm talking about a full professional setup I'd spent years building after we had multiple car break-ins around the area. One of those cameras literally helped the county sheriff identify a guy stealing catalytic converters 2 streets over. So standing there looking at thousands of dollars worth of busted equipment sitting in the dirt. Yeah, I was furious. Then I noticed the paper taped to my front door. Bright orange. Big bold letters. Notice of non-compliance. Real dramatic too, like they were serving a federal warrant or something. According to the notice, my cameras were creating an atmosphere of surveillance and discomfort within the Cedar Hollow residential community. I actually laughed when I read that part because here's the thing. I don't even live inside Cedar Hollow. My property sits right outside the gates. My house was there 15 years before that whole fake luxury neighborhood got built. They paved over an old horse pasture, threw up some decorative fountains, slapped a stone sign by the entrance, and suddenly everybody inside started acting like they were running a tiny country club dictatorship. My cameras pointed at my driveway, my yard, and my tool shed. That's it. No sidewalks, no neighboring windows, no public street. Just my property. But somehow, the HOA board had convinced themselves they could police anything within eyesight of their precious entrance road. And honestly, I already knew exactly who was behind it before I even made the call. Denise Mercer, HOA president. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was campaigning for mayor, smile sharp enough to cut drywall. She answered the phone weirdly calm too, which somehow made it worse. "Oh good," she said, "you're back. I was hoping we could discuss the security issue maturely." Maturely. Meanwhile, my equipment's sitting in pieces next to the garage like a crime scene. I asked her straight up if her people removed my cameras, and she didn't even deny it. She goes, "Several residents felt uncomfortable being observed. Observed. Like I was running some NSA surveillance bunker instead of protecting my own damn house." Then she hit me with this little speech about community trust and shared emotional safety. All those polished HOA buzzwords people use when they want control without sounding controlling. I told her she had absolutely no authority over my property, and there was this pause on the line, dead silence. Then she said something I still remember word for word. "Whether you acknowledge the community standards or not, your home exists adjacent to them. Therefore, your choices affect them." Man, that sentence right there told me everything. This wasn't about privacy. It wasn't about rules. It was about power. They hated the idea that somebody outside their little gated ecosystem wasn't obeying them. Then she casually informed me the damaged cameras had already been processed for disposal, like she was talking about expired office furniture instead of my property. That's when I stopped arguing. Seriously, something in my head just clicked quiet. Because people like Denise, they expect emotional reactions. They expect yelling, threats, legal drama. That's the game they know how to play. But the second you stop feeding that game, that's when they get nervous. So I hung up, sat in my dark kitchen for maybe 20 minutes, staring at the busted camera pile through the window, and then I called somebody I hadn't talked to in months, my buddy Nolan. Former cybersecurity contractor, smartest paranoid person I've ever met. I explained the entire situation expecting him to lose his mind, but instead, the guy started laughing. Not normal laughter either, that dangerous kind where somebody already has an idea forming in their head. Then he goes, "Hold on. They destroyed visible cameras because they didn't like feeling watched?" I said, "Pretty much." And after about 3 seconds of silence, he goes, "Oh, this is going to be fun." Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people completely misunderstand how HOAs actually work. People hear homeowners association and immediately assume those folks can do whatever they want. They can't. According to standard procedure, An HOA only has authority over properties legally tied to its governing documents, usually through deed restrictions or signed agreements. If your property isn't part of that contract, then legally speaking, they've got about as much power over your house as a random guy yelling rules from across the street. And from a legal perspective, touching somebody's security equipment without permission, that gets dangerous real fast. We're talking potential property damage, trespassing, maybe even civil liability, depending on the state. But honestly, the legal stuff wasn't even the most interesting part to me. The psychological side was. See, this is a psychological trap a lot of controlling communities fall into. They convince themselves comfort is the same thing as authority. Once a group gets used to everybody complying, even one independent person starts to feel threatening. Especially somebody with cameras. Especially somebody they can't control. Denise didn't really want privacy. She wanted certainty. She wanted the feeling that her neighborhood existed inside a perfectly managed bubble where nobody challenged the illusion. And the lesson here is, the second people start destroying your property in the name of community harmony, it usually means the harmony was fake to begin with. Nolan came over the next night, carrying 2 backpacks and a plastic toolbox that looked way too small to contain anything important. No dramatic hacker movie nonsense either. No black hoodie. No spy music. Dude showed up wearing cargo shorts and eating gas station beef jerky like he was there to fix my sink. He dumped everything across my kitchen table and started pulling out these tiny matte black devices about the size of a stack of poker chips. Some had magnetic mounts. Some looked like little pieces of industrial hardware, and one honestly resembled a garage door sensor from the early 2000s. I remember staring at the pile thinking, there's no way this stuff matters more than 6 destroyed cameras. Nolan just grinned and said, "Trust me, visible security is mostly theater." Invisible security? That's psychology. Then he explained the system. No video feeds. No microphones. No facial recognition. Just motion analytics, thermal changes, movement patterns, directional tracking. Basically a network designed to understand behavior instead of recording faces. Completely legal. Completely passive. And according to him, way more effective than traditional cameras because people never know where the detection zone actually starts. We spent the entire weekend setting everything up. Tiny sensors buried near the fence line, others mounted under the gutters, a few hidden inside fake landscaping rocks Nolan brought specifically because apparently this man lives his entire life preparing for cyberpunk nonsense. Every sensor connected back to a private encrypted dashboard on my phone. If somebody crossed into certain areas, lingered too long, doubled back repeatedly, or approached structures at odd hours, I'd get an instant alert with movement logs and directional mapping. No images. Just data. Cold, clean, objective data. And honestly, the system looked like absolutely nothing. That was the beauty of it. My house suddenly appeared less protected than before. No cameras on the corners. No blinking LEDs. Nothing visible at all. Which, funnily enough, made the people in Cedar Hollow relax almost immediately. I could literally feel it. The tension disappeared. Denise stopped sending passive-aggressive notices. HOA patrol vehicles quit slowing down near my driveway. One guy who used to glare at my garage every morning suddenly started waving at me again like we were old fishing buddies. It was amazing how friendly people became once they believed they weren't being monitored anymore. Then the alert started. First night, movement near the east fence around 1:13 a.m. Slow pacing pattern. Second night, 2 separate motion paths cutting across the edge of my property from the HOA side trail. Third night, prolonged stationary activity behind my detached workshop around 2:47 a.m. That one caught my attention. Nobody should have been back there. I pulled up the movement map on my phone and watched the tracking dots cluster behind the workshop for almost 4 minutes before leaving through the tree line. For minutes. That's not somebody taking a shortcut. That's somebody snooping. And suddenly all those privacy concerns started looking real selective. Over the next couple weeks, the logs painted a pretty ugly picture. Late night wandering. People cutting through utility paths they absolutely weren't supposed to use. Repeated movement near parked vehicles. Somebody even approached my side gate 3 separate times within 1 week, always between midnight and 3 in the morning. Same movement pattern too, slow approach, pause, retreat. Like they were checking whether something had changed. And here's the creepy part. The more invisible the system was, the more paranoid the neighborhood became. It started small. Conversations stopping when I walked into the local hardware store. HOA residents glancing toward my property during evening walks. One afternoon, I overheard two women near the mailbox kiosks whispering about how my house gave them bad energy now. Bad energy. Because apparently not seeing surveillance was somehow scarier than seeing it. Nolan thought the whole thing was hilarious. Every few days I'd send him updated movement logs and he'd respond with stuff like, "Congratulations, your invisible fence is haunting rich people." But underneath the jokes, he pointed out something important. They know something changed, he told me. They just can't identify what it is. That uncertainty eats at people. And he was right. You could feel the atmosphere shifting. Cedar Hollow had always operated on appearances: trimmed hedges, synchronized mailboxes, polished SUVs lined up like dealership inventory. Everything there depended on predictability. The second unpredictability entered the environment, everybody started unraveling a little. About 3 weeks into the setup, things escalated. I got an alert around 11:40 p.m. while watching TV. Repeated movement along the west side fence. Faster than usual this time. Agitated. I opened the dashboard and saw overlapping movement trails pacing back and forth near the property line. Two individuals. One taller stride pattern, one shorter. Then suddenly, stop. Both signals stationary near the old oak tree separating my lot from the HOA walking path. I killed the lights inside the house and looked through the blinds. Couldn't see much at first except shadows moving near the tree line. Then I heard voices. Low. Irritated. One of them was definitely Denise. "I'm telling you something's still out here," she snapped. Another voice answered. "There are no cameras." "Then how does he always know when people are near the property?" She shot back. I almost laughed out loud hearing that. Because that right there? That was the moment the power dynamic completely flipped. Weeks earlier, they thought they were the authority watching the outsider. Now they were standing in the dark whispering about me like I was some kind of threat they couldn't understand. They stayed out there for maybe 6 minutes before leaving. The next morning, I found fresh footprints near the oak tree and one broken branch hanging over the fence line. They had literally been searching my property, trying to find surveillance equipment that technically didn't exist. And from a legal perspective, that's where their situation started getting really dangerous. Because unlike vague HOA complaints about community discomfort, trespassing leaves evidence, patterns, documentation, which, conveniently, my system collected beautifully. A few days later, another strange thing happened. Denise stopped me while I was getting mail from the roadside box near the entrance. Total personality shift. Gone was the polished HOA queen attitude. She looked tired, nervous, even. She smiled too quickly and asked whether I'd consider reopening dialogue about neighborhood relations. I said, "Thought we already settled that." She hesitated, then said, "Some residents feel uneasy." Uneasy. There it was again. That word, like discomfort itself, was some kind of legal argument. I told her I hadn't changed anything except removing the cameras her people destroyed. She nodded, but the look on her face said she didn't believe me for 1 second. Then she asked the question that confirmed everything. "You're not recording anybody anymore, right?" I remember just staring at her for a moment before answering. "Depends what you mean by recording." Man, the color drained out of her face so fast it almost made me feel bad. Almost. After that interaction, the HOA basically started imploding internally. According to one of my neighbors outside the community, residents began accusing each other of spying. Somebody claimed hidden microphones were buried near the walking trails. Another family insisted thermal cameras had been installed in the street lamps. One guy apparently threatened legal action because he believed his backyard conversations were being monitored. And the entire time, my system wasn't even collecting audio or video, just movement data. Pure paranoia did the rest of the work for free. This is a psychological trap powerful groups fall into all the time. Once people become aware of observation, they start policing themselves even when nobody's actively watching. It's the uncertainty that gets them. The possibility. The imagination fills in the blanks. Then came the night everything finally broke. Around 2 a.m. my phone exploded with alerts. Multiple motion triggers. Rapid movement. West fence, south driveway, rear workshop, all at once. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the back porch just in time to hear somebody cursing near the garage. 3 figures bolted toward the tree line the second the porch light hit. One slipped in the mud and slammed into the fence hard enough to shake it. By the time I reached the corner of the yard, they were already disappearing into the dark, but not before one of them dropped a flashlight and what looked suspiciously like a pair of wire cutters. Wire cutters, which tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. The next morning, I contacted the county sheriff's office and handed over the movement logs, timestamps, and photos of the abandoned tools. The deputy reviewing everything actually laughed at one point and said, "So let me get this straight. They destroyed your security system because they didn't want surveillance, then came back in the middle of the night trying to locate your new security system?" "Pretty much, yeah." 2 days later, Denise showed up at my front door with 2 other HOA board members. No attitude this time. No speeches about emotional safety. These people looked exhausted, defeated. Denise actually apologized. Not a fake corporate apology either, a real one. She admitted the board overstepped, admitted they acted without proper authority, admitted several residents had become overly focused on my property after the cameras were removed. Then came the offer. Full reimbursement for the destroyed equipment. Installation costs covered. Brand new upgraded camera system professionally mounted at HOA expense. Plus written acknowledgement that my property existed entirely outside their jurisdiction. I let the silence hang there for a few seconds because honestly, I wanted them to sit in it. Then I said, "You know, this all could have been avoided if you people just minded your own business." Nobody argued. Denise just nodded slowly like she finally understood how ridiculous the entire situation had become. A week later, the new cameras went up. Better resolution, better coverage, better mounting hardware. Paid for entirely by the same people who smashed the originals. And the funniest part? Nobody complained anymore. Not once. HOA patrol vehicles stopped near my driveway, now for completely different reasons, mostly to wave politely before driving off. Cedar Hollow suddenly became very respectful about property rights, very respectful about privacy, very respectful about staying on their side of the fence. But here's the thing they still don't know. Nolan never removed the sensor network. Every buried detector, every hidden motion node, every silent tracking zone is still sitting exactly where we installed it. Quiet, invisible, watching patterns instead of faces. Because after everything that happened, I realized something kind of unsettling. Cameras make people angry because they can see them. But uncertainty? Uncertainty changes behavior completely. And sometimes the most powerful security system isn't the one people notice. It's the one they can never quite prove exists. Looking back on the whole thing now, I honestly think the cameras were never the real issue. If they were, the HOA would have filed complaints properly, maybe contacted the county, maybe acted like rational adults instead of a neighborhood cult with landscaping standards. No, what really bothered them was the idea that somebody outside their little social structure refused to bend. That's what this entire mess was actually about. Control. People love calling it community values because it sounds nicer, but a lot of the time it's just fear wearing a polo shirt and holding a clipboard. And the crazy part is, once that fear starts spreading through a group, it feeds itself. The second Cedar Hollow believed they might be observed without knowing how. Everybody started exposing their own paranoia. Suddenly, they noticed suspicious behavior everywhere. Suddenly, privacy mattered. Suddenly, boundaries mattered. Funny how that works. According to standard procedure, communities function best when everybody respects clear lines. Your property, my property. Your rights, my rights. But once people convince themselves they're morally justified in crossing those lines for the greater good, things get ugly fast. From a legal perspective, most HOA conflicts actually start small: a fence dispute, parking issue, noise complaint, then spiral because somebody gets addicted to the feeling of authority. And this is a psychological trap people rarely talk about. Once control becomes part of someone's identity, losing that control feels personal. That's why Denise kept pushing. Every time I resisted, it challenged the image she had of herself as the person who managed the environment around her. The lesson here is, security isn't really about cameras or sensors or fences. It's about boundaries. Healthy people respect them automatically. Unhealthy systems test them constantly. And honestly, if there's one thing this whole experience taught me, it's that visible power isn't always the strongest kind. Sometimes silence changes behavior more than confrontation ever could. Sometimes people become their most honest selves when they think nobody can prove what they're doing. So now I'm curious. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have sued the HOA immediately? Would you have escalated the surveillance even further? Or would you have just moved away and let the whole neighborhood implode on its own? Because trust me, after living next to Cedar Hollow, I learned real fast that gated communities don't always keep problems out. Sometimes they lock the problems inside.